Well, good morning from Cheshire. My name's Ken Black. This is my garden, and I want to talk today about early spring flowering clematis. And I thought I would combine this with showing you around my garden, because I have them in various places. And if you're a subscriber to my YouTube channel, I thought you might be interested in seeing exactly where I live and what the garden looks like. This is the very front of the house. It's a roadside border where we used to have a lime tree, and you're now looking at blue dancer growing over an archway and partly through a rose. It's such an elegant and well-named clematis. There's a slight breeze this morning and you can actually see it dancing. A closer look will give you more of an idea of the shape of the flowers. White interior and 4 blue sepals hanging down. Very, very elegant. It's also quite a showstopper. Many people stop at the front of the house and look at this, and a number of people have asked me what it's called. I've put a label on it. It's such a nice plant to have in the garden. On the other side of the entrance to the front drive, there's a seedling of Francis Reeves. It's come out slightly darker than the original. Very few seedlings come out absolutely true to the parent. You need to do vegetative propagation, such as cuttings, to achieve that. But you never know what you're going to get with seeds. But I think this is nice. It's recently planted, and the idea is that it will grow along the fence, and I've got 2 more clematis further along to take over. Just inside the gate post, I have a fence on which I'm growing, or trying to grow, clematis that will be in flower for most of the year. These are the early ones at this end, and a full list of the clematis will be on my website, but I'll point out a few of those for you in close-up. The clematis in the middle is Blue Eclipse. That's the bluey purpley one with the white edges. The pink one is Pink Flamingo. It's a smaller flower, but if I pan up, you'll be able to see it when it's fully out. Makes a nice contrast, I think. Moving further down, we have a macropetala. Now there are differences between alpinas, which are the single ones, and the doubles, which are the macropetallas, and I'll explain a little more about those later. The white is Broughton Bride, which is a very dainty clematis, which is mingling right along the fence. Next to Broughton Bride is Ruby Celebration. What a tapestry of colour. So these are a few of the clematis that are planted on this fence, and further along the fence I'll show you later in the year, because we've got summer flowering clematis and then autumn flowering ones. But I think that makes quite a stunning display. These clematis are planted in quite a narrow border, fronted with sleepers. There's no bottom to the border. The sleepers are just on top of the gravel, because it's very stony underneath, and this allows the clematis to get their roots down through the stones to find moisture. It's good compost that they're growing in around the crown of the plant. That's where the roots join the stems, so they should be getting the best of both worlds, and feed them as well. Just around the corner is Clematis ruby. Now hopefully she is going to fill up this part of the fence over the next year or so, but she's planted with a montana, which is Broughton Star, and the plan is for Broughton Star to grow up this fence and along the top to hide some of the structures. Walking down the side of our house towards the rear garden, you're confronted with another clematis. This is a seedling from Clematis willi, which is an alpina, and I'm assuming its parentage is with a coriana, which is growing near to it. I've called it Broughton willi. It's not a registered clematis, it's just one that I've named for my own enjoyment and benefit. As you can see, this location is not very attractive. It's next to the storm water grid, bordering a fence and our bin store. The ground underneath is very stony, so I removed the bottom of this ceramic pot and planted the seedling in here. It's wedged against the fence so that it can't be moved, and again it allows the clematis to get its roots right down through the gravel, through the stones and the subsoil, whilst I feed it and keep the top part of the clematis in decent compost. And for the first full year, this is not a bad display of flower. Moving further round from Broughton willi, there's the bin store. We'll quickly pass over that to the trellis at the end of the long border, and this is the beginning of our rear garden. In the centre you can see Spiky, which has hundreds of flowers and are just coming out. You can also see the amount of new growth on Spiky, which I will tie in. Unfortunately, my propagator is full and I've run out of space to take cuttings, but they will wait until later in the year. Also on this we have Albina plena. That's the white one that you can see. That's a very pretty clematis. And that's a seedling of Markham's pink, which is not particularly pink, but is very welcome nonetheless. And the very thin buds that you can see, those are Ros Kelly, which should be out in a week or so. It would be nice to show you all the early ones out at once, but they come out at different times, covering a period of 6 to 8 weeks. So it's not possible to do that, but it gives a lovely succession of early flower in the garden. And in our garden they come at a time when the spring bulbs are probably past their best and there's a bit of a gap. So these really do fulfill an important role. As you come round the corner from the trellis, you will see what we call the long border, which is the left-hand side of the garden. It takes your eye down past the shed under the rose arch to another part of the garden, which I'll show you in a few minutes. And if I pan around slightly, you can see the sweep of the lawn and the two lawn paths that lead off it. Fairly bare because it is early spring, but the yellow azalea is coming out, and the aces that we have in the garden are quite beautiful as the young foliage, pink, orange or green, starts to unfold. The long border is made up of numerous perennials, roses and clematis, and all the roses play host to a different variety of clematis. This is an obelisk that's carrying Pamela Jackman. There's a peony just beyond there, a crabapple in flower, and the metal structure that's going around slightly is called a tulip. We bought that in Hereford a number of years ago. And the trellising on the side of the shed has been replanted, so that's not very floriferous at the moment. Sweeping along, there is a metal fence between those posts where I've planted a number of climbing roses, and you'd be surprised to learn that there are a number of clematis there as well. And the border with the bird bath at the front and the yellow azalea is a rose and clematis border. Again, all the roses are playing host to clematis, and some of the herbaceous clematis are planted there as well. In the distance is a springboard, that's the other border on the other side of the garden, and the gate leads to a raised pond. Along the back of the house, where we had an extension built, and we had it glassed right down to the ground so that we could see the garden, particularly in the winter, and bring it inside. There is a mixture of tulips and 4 different early flowering clematis. The first 2 here, the one on the right is Markham's pink, and the one on the left is a seedling of willy, which is different to the other seedlings that I have. The flowers are quite large and it looks really good in a pot. I'll just pan down to the base so that you can see the detail. Markham's pink is in a black plastic 10-litre pot, as is the one on the left. We bought the ceramic pots because they look nicer, but it gives us the opportunity to change the colour scheme. For example, the black pot fits inside it very snugly and you can't see the black pot. So once willy has finished flowering, I can put another clematis in there, grown in a black pot, and you wouldn't know that it wasn't grown in the ceramic one. This gives me a mobility of colour that planting the ground doesn't, because we can bring colours to the foreground when we want to. The same arrangement is on the other side of the window. This is Constance. Most of the clematis that I have in pots are grown up a wigwam of 3 canes with string tied round as you go up, and they provide the right sort of support. And the one on the left is Albina plena, which is a cutting I took from the original plant that you saw on the trellis earlier. And those tulips have been in flower for weeks and weeks. And on this obelisk we have Pamela Jackman. Also growing there is Ernest Markham, not in flower. Round the back, Viticella rubra and also Viticella Wallenberg. I'll just pan down the rest of the border. Past the metal rose, down to the rose archway and the bottom of the garden. Coming down to the rose arch, I've got roses growing on each side with clematis. This one is Woodrow seedling, and at the bottom, just by the yellow label, lavender twirl, which I planted last year. Woodrow seedling is a very prolific grower and needs a lot of pruning during the season. On the other side is Wollerton Old Hall, which is more well behaved, and at the bottom is Clematis Diamond Anniversary. Having moved down through the rose arch now to the trellising at the end of the pavilion, immediately in front of you is an obelisk with Francis Reeves, and there are various clematis planted at the base. Pink Flamingo is the one that you can see growing up the trellising, but I've also planted further along Red Rihanna. Now, that may be a mistake. Maybe Red Rihanna is going to be too vigorous and will fill that space completely, squeezing out the other clematis, but we'll see. In the pot right at the bottom, and I think that's Madewell Hall beginning to regrow. It got snapped off completely, almost to ground level. But I think that's just coming away, hopefully anyway, because it's a lovely Macropetala. And this is our pavilion, called very unkindly by some of our friends the bus shelter. This is where Helen and I sit and have a cup of tea during the day, and have been known to sit and have the odd glass of wine in the evening. Past the shed and through to the business part of the garden, where I'll take you in a few minutes. I'll just pan up so that you can see the view that we have from the pavilion. That's a hot border. We try and put late flowering summer perennials in there to provide a real splash of reds and oranges and the fiery colours of late summer, early autumn. To the swing seat you see in the distance, and probably can just see it from here, Blue Dancer growing up the side. There are some clematis on the other side which I'll show you as well. And this border on the right is a border full of perennials. But in the background you can see what we call the metal structure there. It's a mixture of roses and clematis. I don't know why I keep saying clematis. There's clematis everywhere. Just before I take you through to the business part of the garden, I just want to show you this clematis which is not in flower. This is Harlow Carr. It's been here for probably 16 years. It's an early large flowering hybrid. It's a series that Raymond Everson produced a few years ago based on the names of RHS gardens. It's such a reliable flowerer. It goes right along above both windows each year. And last year I took it down to ground level because it was getting quite woody. I only took one stem in case it didn't regenerate, and it did. So this year I did it to the other stem, and look at the new growth that it's put on as a result. Harlow Carr. Just opposite Harlow Carr is Princess Kate. I've grown her in a pot ever since I got her. She seems to do well in a pot, and that's up a new obelisk. She's put on a lot of growth as well. Right, this is the business part. I call it that because this is where all the work is done, all the spare plants are stored, and all the growing is done. That's the main greenhouse. I use it to do some shooting of videos when the weather's not good to be outside. A couple of raised beds, one of our sheds, the first of the clematis greenhouses, and in the foreground, clematis in pots. These are either being developed to go out later on, or ones that have finished flowering. There's a mixture of winter ones that have finished, and one or two of the spring ones that are not large enough really to plant out or to put on display. And in the background I've got one or two young Montanas as well. The plant in the foreground is the stock plant of Rose Kelly. This is the first of the clematis greenhouses that we've come to, and it's the one I use to store plants that I'm growing on. They're past the seedling stage, and I want them to mature. So these get regularly pruned down to develop better root balls. Some of them have gone through that process, and I'm going to let them flower this year, and some I may give away. They're certainly big enough to be planted in the garden. Some more down here. There's a mixture in here of large flowered hybrids and viticellas. And I don't have to move the camera to take you for the next shot. Those are clematis there that are mainly herbaceous ones in that row. There's a couple of texensis in there as well. And if I pick the camera up and try not to jiggle it too much, the other side of the greenhouse is where I store all the clematis that are waiting to come into flower, or again have flowered, but all these are waiting to come into flower, and I'll put them in positions in the garden so that we can enjoy them. One or two of them are for plant sales. I might do a plant sale at the front of the house because I've got rather a lot at the moment, but many of them are carrying quite large buds. Most of these are well-known clematis, the older varieties especially, but there are one or two that you will not see on the open market. This is an example of one that you won't see on the open market. It is registered, however. It's called Clotted Cream, and it was produced by Harry Caddock. It's never been in commercial production, but it's a beautiful creamy flower, I don't know how many there are in existence, but I have this one, and I'm going to take some more cuttings in a couple of months when I've got space in the propagator to take them. But that's clotted cream. Another view of the same clematis. It's a forest of canes and green, isn't it? Some viticellas up this end, but I don't have that many viticellas in pots. I tend to grow most of those in the garden. It's the large flowered hybrids that I grow more in pots because some of them don't appear to like my soil. This bit is, we call it the Woodland garden. It's got some trees, and as you can see, dogtooth violets and hellebores, the sort of things you'd find in a woodland. And it provides a lot of shade for the second clematis greenhouse, which I'll now show you. Here it is. It's a second-hand one that we bought a couple of years ago, and this is the one I do use for seeds and cuttings. The clematis in the pot in the foreground is Esme. It's just been repotted this year and has responded well. And the clematis on the other side, the taller one that you can see, is Wisley. It's in the same series as Harlow Card that I showed you earlier. It's so established there, I had to site the greenhouse carefully because I didn't want to risk losing that clematis. I've had some difficulty taking cuttings from it, but I have some now. This very small greenhouse here is where I put the bags of seed. It's out of direct sunlight, but it does get light, and I just leave them in there and unzip it and check it every month or so to see what's coming through. Inside the greenhouse, which I must say is looking remarkably tidy, I must introduce you. He looks after the place. He's got his own perch and everything, so there's never any trouble in here. Cedric takes good care of things. Cuttings. Potting bench, more cuttings, and some of these are seedlings. I use a system of coloured labels to tell me which clematis are which, and it saves me using more plastic than I need to. I'll pan round and show you how it works. This one, for example, has a white label where the name is. That's amber. So everything with an orange label like that, I know is from the same sowing. I've got some around here that have come on. In fact, that density there, they're probably all amber. This plant with the black label is one that I found in the compost heap. I found 6 when I emptied a compost heap last year. They were about 3 feet down, but clearly growing, and I recognised from the leaves that they were clematis. They're obviously ones that I've decided had died and had thrown away, but that compost bin had been closed for at least 2 years, so they've just been getting on with growing in total darkness. So when I rescued them, I decided to see if they would regrow properly, and I just put a black label in each. So I've got those spread around the greenhouses. I'm going to let them flower this year because I'm curious to know what they are. This has a particularly distinctive leaf. Right, having come out of the greenhouse and looking up past the woodland garden to the side of the swing seat, and there you can see the flowers of Blue Dancer, and we'll have a walk up there. This is the view of the pavilion from the other end, the border that I showed you earlier, And I'll swing round here. There are clematis growing on the fence which will be in flower later this year. And here's the swing seat, and here is Blue Dancer. What a fabulous clematis that is. On the other side of the swing seat, just coming out, is Amber, which is basically a Coreana. And next to it is Constance. More clematis growing here. This is an area that I've decided to allow to grow wild. I've left nettles in there. Ignore the silver ball sculpture. And this is Willie, one of the most prolific of alpinas, and it's a joy every year. And it's the seedling source of a number of clematis I now have. Look at that. The flowers are not huge, but there are so many of them. And quite long lasting. Just on the other side of Willie is Broughton Bride. I've had this for many years. We helped out at Southport when the British Clematis Society had a stand there that Sue Reed organised, and it's a clematis I brought back from there, and it's been happily growing here ever since. Just on the other side of the path there's an obelisk with a number of clematis growing up, and the one that you can see is Octopus. Again, it's a fabulous shaped flower, quite a big flower. And it's next to an Acer, which in the morning sun looks as if it's on fire. Contrasting well with the yellow. And the smell, of course, from that is unbelievably good. I think if I was going to promote any other plant than clematis, azaleas like the yellow one would be on the list. Now then, this is the colonnade that we have. And on it we have a couple of montanas, and growing up each leg of it, there's a clematis. Morning Heaven is one of the ones in the middle because it takes over the colonnade when it comes out. There are two growing up the first leg, and the main one is Napolensis. You can see the seed heads, which are very pretty. That comes out in the garden. Well, it varies. Sometimes it's the end of November and sometimes it's as late as the beginning of January. But it flowers well. I've not collected seed from it yet. I keep forgetting, but I must try and do that this year and get some more plants. But Napolensis is a very good winter plant to add some colour to the garden. You can see through the end of the colonnade, that's a stellata. There you can get a better view of the Magnolia stellata now that we've walked through the colonnade. This is a spring border. Many of the daffodils and the primulas have died back, but there are some bluebells that are coming out. There's some hellebores. And a couple of clematis again that are grown in pots all year round. And the start of the Montana coming into flower. There we are, there's some of the buds. This one is Maylene. Now if I can hold this steady enough, if you look beyond the azalea you can see the blue flower. This is a seedling of Willie, and this is one I've called Tea Dance. The reason being that the shape of the flower reminds me of the sort of Victorian dresses, almost with a bustle, that you would see in black and white pictures and drawings of the time. There are some more, if I pan round, I mean, some of them are not fully out yet, but they do very much remind me, because of the shape, of that sort of dress, and the association with me is of people going to a tea dance. Well, that's where we've just been. We're now up to the top of the garden by the house, and the Clematis you can see in the middle growing there is John Treasure. I'll fold him along the fence. It covers the fence when it comes out. And our raised pond. And Clematis Cragside. It's a wonderful dark colour. I once had it in a pot with Wesselton, and I'm going to do that again. Wesselton is a very light blue, and the combination of the two colours I thought was stunning. So when I get some cuttings this year of both, I will put two together in a pot and let them grow in harmony. Well, one last look at the garden. The colonnade that we've just walked through, all our bird feeders, the rose and clematis border, including that lovely yellow, the rose archway, our lawn with its paths off it, the long border, and back to our extension with the big windows so that we can see the garden and all that lovely colour of those clematis in pots. I hope you've enjoyed that. It's quite long, I know, but there isn't a quick way of showing you around the garden.